Cool. So welcome everybody. We're just going to run through today's session, which originally you may have noticed from the title was James and David's Excellent Database Adventure. James is actually sick, so Rosie has very graciously agreed to step in and help me out for today. So Rosie, I'll pass over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rosie. I've worked at Redgate for almost a couple of years now, and I work as a sales development rep.
My name's Dave. I'm part of the Solutions Engineering team. And today we're just going to give you a little run through of some of the typical challenges we see and how we've got around those in the past.
So we have to cheat code like everything else in life. Bad things go in means bad things come out. What we really want is to ensure we're putting the best quality changes and processes into our workflows to ensure that only the best results are achieved. So when we talk about good and bad, what do we mean? Given that we work with a huge variety of users, we get to experience the full range of processes. So we want to look ahead at today's demo, just to run through some of the key challenges that we encounter. First up, you'll all be familiar with this one, bad code. Bad code never ends well. This could be genuinely bad code or sometimes just a simple syntax error. But when coding by hand, unsupported, this is an easy thing for even the best of us to add into a pipeline. Next up, even the best code can suffer from poor formatting. So at this point, you may say, why care if the code's good? But this is where we consider the impact to the wider team. So it may not impact the code performance, but at some point, this code is likely to go into review. And a variety of formatting makes it even more challenging to understand the impact and see the issues. Version control is key. Even if we addressed issues 1 and 2, if we can't track and review the code, then what's the point? Version control doesn't have to be challenging, but it is critical to best practice. So maybe your code is now in version control. What next? What is the deployment structure? What environments do we deploy to? Who deploys the code? Any of these that get missed can cause major problems. So who here has seen deployments made on untested code?
Couple of you. Good.
You may get lucky, but why be lucky when you can be safe, right? So whether we're talking unit testing, load testing, or user testing, a robust strategy prevents more work down the line. Finally, documentation. Nobody likes to document. Well, some people do, but yet to meet one. It's time-consuming, but what happens when the person who understands the database goes on holiday, is off sick, or leaves? It's not fun for those left standing, so it's a key. So let's look at what the options are. I'm sure none of this is any surprise to any of you, but badly written code can be helped with standardizing code and using repeatable tasks. Agreeing on a team formatting strategy makes spotting those issues a lot easier down the line. Using version control means anyone can see what's occurring in the database, as well as having a clear picture of what has changed if you need to troubleshoot a bad deployment. Having an agreed-upon process allows teams to make sure each stage of best practice is hit on the deployment journey with everyone aware of their responsibilities. Tested code ensures errors are picked up earlier and fixed before reaching production. Ultimately, that additional process up front saves time in the long run. And finally, documentation. It's a challenging task to keep up with documentation, but we may show you something to take the challenging part away. So this is a kind of real-life example which shows that small problems can kind of compound to create significant problems in the workflow. It all starts with some busy developers who were unsupported and writing some bad code. This code was saved locally and never saved into source control. As you can imagine, the team were very busy testing and pretty much, they were very busy, but testing had pretty much fallen away by that point. Ultimately, the code ended up just being thrown over the fence to the DBA to figure it out straight in production. However, the DBA's job was far from easy, as there was no standardization of set formatting guidelines. That meant it was really difficult to review the code properly and locate any potential issues before deploying. This often led to the production blowing up on a fairly regular basis. And then the final straw was the lack of documentation of the database or visibility over what was deployed. Fixing errors became a nightmare, and new starters, like our developer friend over here, ended up being super confused. So ultimately, this led to a frustrating environment to work in and a high staff turnover.
So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those sort of challenges and have probably come across these in the real world. And this is something that we encounter with customers that we speak to all the time. Just little sort of simple issues that really get compounded by sheer volume. So when coming through something like lack of version control, it might not seem that critical up front if the code's going through and good, but it's when there is an issue, it's how you then address that to go backwards. Where can you see what that change was? How can you understand the impact? Same with the testing and the lack of documentation. So what we'd like to do today is just show you guys some simple solutions that we have here at Redgate, just on being able to address some of those sort of key challenges. And this is the typical workflow that we would suggest with exactly that sort of customer, just on how we can then adopt some of that best practice going forward. So I've got a couple of environments here, just a development testing environment that I'm going to run through. And to start off with, the first thing I want to do is get my code into version control. Now, obviously, you can do this through sort of native Git functionality. We do have a plugin here that we can do this to leverage quite easily. So we're just going to link this in using SQL source control. And I'm just going to use the try me out function here and just link this to a repository. At this point, I just want to do my first commit, check through my objects, and start to get a working system that we can employ going forwards, just to give me the visibility. So put this in, I could spell, as an initial commit, and just check my code in. My database is now in version control. We can start sharing this amongst the team, we can start collaborating, and we can really start to work in a far more structured and visible environment. Now, at this point, I want to make a change. So I'm going to use SQL prompt, and to be fair, you wouldn't want to see me coding without it, because we'd all be here a lot longer than 20 minutes. But I'm just going to use the code snippet functionality, and that's going to allow me to build out this stored procedure over here on the right, just by typing CP. And these type of formatting and scripting snippets can be shared amongst the team, so everyone can start to adopt that same sort of workflow. So if I press enter, it's going to prompt me to just enter a name for my new procedure. Other code snippet, SSF, select style from. Not the ideal structure, but I'm going to refine that in a second. And I'm going to select from my customers table, and I'm going to get a preview over here on the right-hand side of everything that I've got. From there, I now want to address this, because I don't necessarily want everything included. So let's just refine my selection a little bit, and then we come to the formatting aspect. So it's all great to put this sort of thing into version control, but at the end of the day, as Rosie said, someone is going to have to review this code, and although everyone can probably understand the code, it's going to make their task a little bit more difficult if I'm using one style, Rosie's using another. It's just going to mean that errors are not as easily identified as they could be. So from here, we can agree on a team style. So that could be using, for example, commas before. I can select that. I can code however I'm most productive. I can code however I'm going to be most accurate. And then a quick keyboard shortcut at the end, and I default the code before submission into a standard formatting template. Just allows me to check that in. Now, if after all my work, or not too much work in this case, of building my new stored procedure, I accidentally close that, don't save it, got a lot of handy little features like being able to come in here, go into SQL history, and anything that I've closed, just be able to jump back into there. So not only can I see my query, but I can also see the various versions of this that have existed over time. Obviously not a huge time frame involved today, but I can double click on that and reopen anything. I can set the limits around how long I retain those sort of queries for as well. From there, I've made my change, and I just want to then check that into version control. So down here, I'm going to commit my latest changes. I'm going to get a breakdown over here, Nothing's going to exist over here on the right as it's a newly created object. Tick that in, add a comment, and put into version control. Now, everything I check in and everything the rest of the team checks in is going to be very visible just by being able to then come in and crucially see that history. So I can always see the tiered structure up the top here. We have the comments that I'm adding in, so the more descriptive I can be, the better. Down here, the actual object that's changed, and down here, a breakdown of the code. And I can go back to any of these stages when I want to move that side through into my next environment. A couple of other little helpful features that we have in here. You may have noticed that my development environment, my tab down there was green. When I come in via SQL prompt, I have the option to set something really simple, but something incredibly helpful, the tab coloring side. So within here, my development environments are automatically going to be flagged up with a green surround. If I try and write a query in production, I'm just going to be presented with a red frame as well. Just a little simple thing that ultimately is hopefully going to stop me making an error and trying to code in the wrong environment at that point. Alongside this, I can just use keyboard shortcut and jump into the command palette. And this is going to help me not only navigate around SQL prompt, but navigate around all of my database objects as well. So from anything I want to see in here, I can merely use the keyboard or the mouse to be able to type and jump around the entire environment as I see fit. So what we're doing here is just trying to make a more flexible, more intuitive workflow. This comes alongside things like code analysis. We can share these type of things between the team, and it's going to help us correct, as you can see here, any of the underlying parts, any area that I think is not going to be something that optimally I'm going to want to proceed with. But now I've got this into version control, the challenge then becomes, how do I take this further? And taking that sort of standardized way, so we aren't just throwing scripts at people and asking them to deploy them and run them through from there. So to do that, I now need to looking at the changes I've got in dev and moving those over, but I don't want to take them from dev. I want to take them from version control. So we can use comparison tools. We can set the Eastwind dev there, but we're actually going to take the version of it that exists in source control. And we could, if we wanted to, jump in and take either of these aspects of the previous deployed state. So if I didn't want to deploy my new procedure over, I could just take it from there. But for today, we're going to take our new change over as well. So we're going to compare this to our test environment. I'm just going to click here to run that comparison. And we're going to see all of the objects that exist in one environment that aren't in the other. So if we compare here, what we've got is I've got some historic changes over here. So I've got employees, order detail, orders, changes I haven't previously moved over. I've also got one here with my stored procedure. That's in my version control system there. I could take that if I wanted to. And down here, I'm even highlighting a change that exists in my target that isn't in development. So I can be very selective at this point as to exactly what I want to move. But by doing it here, I can move my new procedure into my new environment. I can leave the other changes if I don't want to take those right now. Deploy from here. Whether I want to either create a deployment script to pass on if we're looking at somebody else in the team executing that change, or in this case, I can use the actual comparison tool itself to generate that script. Still going to get a preview here. I can still save it at this point. And over here, I can just deploy that change from one to the other. The comparison at this point will refresh and be able to give me the option that I can then see any of those remaining changes that I've chosen not to progress over from there. But once we're there, that's just, as we saw in the initial part of the story. It's about getting the changes structured in that clear formatting way, being able to move those across, being able to have the tools to assist us to be able to make that jump, and then take that over. But once we get there, we then have to consider what we're going to do with the code now it's in test. Because, as Rosie highlighted, without that unit testing, production ultimately is potentially going to see great formatted code, clear checks that have been supported, but it still might not be what we want. So for that side, we can move over to our testing environment, and we can then look at something like T-SQL-T framework. So obviously, this is an open source framework that Redgate sponsors, but We can make adopting it a little easier by providing a bit of assistance. So using SQL test, I can click to add the database that I want to add, in this case my testing environment. And if I want to, I can also include all of the SQL cop static analysis tests along with it as well. From here, I can deploy this onto my target. And I'm going to have a complete testing framework out of the box that I can run here. And to run this, it is literally as simple as run tests. I get a tick or a cross for a failure. And if I do have a failure, I can click in and I can see the objects that that failure has actually been identified on. I've got a link to some additional resources that I can read. And even as the tests are running, we'll calculate the code coverage as we go through. So this will give us a really clear idea from there as to exactly where any potential issues are going to come from. We can tailor this framework as well. That's very simple, just to come in and add a new test. So we'll call it something creative, like new test. Create there, and you'll be presented with a good sort of guiding framework of how to then implement those across from there. Now, obviously, all this scenario that we're looking at today is based around manual deployments. We're looking at adopting good practice in those first steps. All of this can go on to be automated eventually, but really we want to get the best practice in before we're automating, because leaping straight into there, we can open up a real can of worms on being able to do that. The final sort of part that we identified in there as well was documentation. As a show of hands, is there anyone in the room who enjoys writing database documentation? Take that as a good answer. So we can make it really, really easy. This is not anything that anyone I've ever met has actually enjoyed doing. So we come in here and we can go to documentation site. So this is Redgate SQL Doc. And the idea behind this is really that we can just capture absolutely everything you want and develop not only documentation, but documentation that's easy to update. You can share it amongst the team incredibly easily. We can come over here and select the objects that we want to cover in our documentation. We can add overall descriptions. We can even come in and add specific descriptions to tables. We can see all of the details that we want in here. And then at this point, it literally is a couple of clicks away from having all your work done for you. So if we select here and generate the documentation on that side, and what would normally be an incredibly painful, incredibly long-winded task is going to be done for us, and it's something that this can then be shared among the team as you need. Coming in from here, and in probably under 30 seconds there, we've created 384 pages of documentation on your database. From here, we get a full table of contents if we wish. We can jump into any of the objects. We can see all of the settings. We can see the actual SQL script that's involved. We even come down and we can see the dependencies as well. So all of this is something that you can easily roll out on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whatever you need to do, when there's changes going through, however you wish to run that side, but it doesn't have to be a time-consuming process. There are other solutions that we could run through, such as dependency tracking, test data generation. All of these things are available as part of the Toolbar Essentials bundle that includes all of these tools, along with the data version of the comparison tool as well. So it doesn't just have to be about the schema side. We can also do that for the data side to create scripts there. But what can be a huge range of problems and a huge range of potential issues and really take a lot of your time, if we're putting that good practice in up front and just bringing some standardization into the processes, we really can achieve a lot more in the end goal and probably remove a huge time investment that you're seeing from there. So, come back here. So we finished up that sort of process that we had with all the bad deployments. If we could take all of these out, obviously the entire process investment would be far easier. We've got a huge range of resources if you're interested in looking at this any further. Given that it's the end of 3 days of show, if you'd like us, do come and wake us up on the floor next to the booth for the next sort of 20 minutes or so. But ultimately, go online. We have technical articles. We have a huge amount of community content there available for you to look at. Obviously, if there's anything you want to explore further, reach out to us at Redgate. We'd love to have a chat about it further. And obviously, if you wish to give any feedback on the session today, it'd be great. Also, don't forget the final draw is being done in the expo hall immediately following this session. So do go down there for any of the remaining prize draws that you want to do. But thank you very much for joining both of us today and just seeing that side.